Hi everyone. I can't believe it's been about a year since I switched to Linux, but here I am still going strong and with no intention of going back to Windows. During this time, I learned a few things. Hopefully, this might help people who are thinking about switching and want some perspective from someone who hasn't been on Linux for so many years that they have forgotten how it is to be a new user. Let's address some common things that often come up in the Linux switching discussion. Your Linux distro doesn't matter. You will hear this a lot when a seasoned user is trying to explain the pros and cons of switching to Linux, but I am here to tell you that it's a lie. Your distro choice does matter at the start. It might not matter later, but it definitely does at the start. And as proven by how fierce some users can be about their distro of choice, the distro obviously matters to them. So why does the distro matter? It isn't because you are stuck with the distro defaults forever, but it's because you as a user have certain needs. You might want something that doesn't require a PhD to set up, or you might want total control. Maybe you prefer free and open source software and nothing else. You might hate the terminal, or you might love it. The reason why seasoned users will tell you that the distro doesn't matter is because they know how to achieve the end result they want after some tinkering, but you might not want to tinker. And user experience is a very important aspect for a lot of people. For some Linux veterans, graphical interfaces are the devil. I am not even joking. I have seen people actively hating on them and the people defending their existence. The terminal is their Bible, and according to them, you should use the distro how they do it. Free and open source. And you are free to use it, the way I want you to use it. Anyway, what they don't realize is that using the terminal is also a user experience, one that they are accustomed to, just as much as you might be accustomed to graphical interfaces. Luckily, they don't represent all Linux users. You could actually relish a challenge, though, and you might go straight to something like Arch Linux, and that's fine too. The point is, you have preferences, and some Linux distros fit them more than others. The fact that you can mold most distros to your liking is irrelevant if you are not the molding type. I was one of those people who thought, I will never touch a terminal, so I started with Zorin OS. But as time went on, I discovered I was the molding type. I ended up trying a lot of distros, including Arch and NixOS, which aren't exactly known for their easy learning curve. Arch nowadays isn't actually that hard anymore if you use the Arch install script to install it, but that distro can still trip you up here and there. And, I was just talking to some colleagues who were discussing the horrors of trying to explain that Microsoft Word is not a search engine. So yeah, everyone has needs. You need a PhD to use Linux. This is related to what I just said, and it is another misconception I still see nowadays. You really do not need to be a terminal wizard anymore. Some distros will require it. Others will be very simple and will let you do everything via a graphical interface. Though, there can be cases where you might still need to use the odd terminal command here and there. But with something like Linux Mint, if you are not tinkering, you can probably never touch the terminal. You will also find, though, that there is a lot of documentation on Linux, which is arguably in better shape than what you'll find for Windows. Granted, the quality of the documentation can vary from project to project. Unfortunately, you will also find Linux documentation where the person who wrote it made some assumptions, and that's where the good old adage, read the fucking manual, falls apart. As someone who has created a lot of training material, I get frustrated when some Linux developers think that just because they wrote the documentation, then users should know what to do. The accessibility and quality of the documentation is very important. Knowing who is going to read it is also very important, as that shapes how the documentation is written. You need the latest and greatest for gaming. This one is actually true for the most part, but it also depends on your hardware. If you have a very new graphics card, then you do need the latest and greatest. With older hardware, you will be mostly fine without having the latest graphics drivers or kernel. Somewhat. This is actually a bit nuanced. Gaming is fairly demanding, and there have been a lot of kernel updates recently that improved performance for older GPUs significantly, and I mean by about 30%. So while an older card will be supported by an older kernel, and a newer card might not, a newer kernel can still improve performance for older cards. The downside is that newer kernels also bring regressions. The same kernel that benefited older cards was also hell for my newer AMD card. If you are using an NVIDIA card, in the last year there have been significant performance improvements, as the NVIDIA drivers for Linux were historically pretty bad. So for that, you need the latest drivers you can get. This is not me trying to push people towards a rolling release distro, as you don't need one for gaming. I am just saying that one that freezes their release cycle for a long time, such as Debian, might not work well should you have a new graphics card. Having said all that, with the RAM-pocalypse, we have not had a new GPU for a while, and Linux has had time to catch up. So for now, it is less of an issue than it was when I first started using Linux a year ago. For those who don't know, a rolling release distro serves updates continually as they become available, instead of releasing them only after a certain amount of time has passed. The advantages of Linux distributions that don't follow a rolling release model is that you have to worry about software updates breaking only a couple of times a year. Or, if you use Debian, once every 2 years. You still get security updates and, for some distros, some bug fixes. But if you buy newer hardware or a new feature for your GPU ships during that time, if you are on something like Ubuntu or Mint, you won't get it for at least 6 months. You can't run games that have anti-cheat. That's a misconception. You cannot run games that use kernel-level anti-cheat where the developer decided not to support Linux. Usually, it's games that have multiplayer PvP. But it isn't the case for all the games that have PvP. For example, Arc Raiders works just fine on Linux. ProtonDB is the place to go to see whether the game will run on your system. Linux Mint is for beginners. That is true, and it isn't the only good distro for beginners. But I also want to point out something else. You really don't have to switch to something else, even after having used Linux for years. Good for beginners just means that it probably has some good defaults out of the box. If you like it, stick with it. Rolling releases ship bug fixes quicker. True, but if you don't use a rolling release, you also see less bugs. This one depends a little bit on the distro you are using, though. One thing I have learned after using quite a few of these rolling releases is that you are essentially the beta tester of the rest of the Linux world. If you are annoyed that Windows breaks all the time, maybe don't jump into a rolling release right away. I don't recall a time where Windows ever broke for me. Arch broke a number of times. I am sure I will get comments from people saying Arch works perfectly for them, and I am happy it does, truly. People have different needs, different hardware, different software configurations. I hit just about every RDNA 4 card bug out there as they came out while being on Arch. This doesn't mean I hate Arch, by the way. Anyway, I really enjoy using Linux, and if you want to take back some control, not have to deal with ads, maybe feel like you are discovering new, cool techie things again, then Linux is for you. It has improved so much and just keeps getting better. The main thing you need to do before you switch is check whether your hardware and software runs well with Linux. If they do, you are golden. If they don't, you might want to explore some alternatives and dual boot in the meantime. That's what I did when I switched. I kept, and still have, a Windows partition just in case. I really only used Windows at the beginning, and now it is sitting there unused. I have friends who occasionally want to play a PvP game that has kernel-level anti-cheat, so I can't get rid of it just yet. But with companies like EA that are now entertaining the thought of supporting Linux even with their anti-cheat, maybe there is hope. Thanks for listening this far. This is Zarian. See you at the next one.